So let's just quickly review what we just did. We created a My Site project. We created a polls app within our My Site project. We connected our polls app to our My Site project inside of our settings, inside the installed apps. Inside of our polls project, polls app, we created a urls.py file, and because we want to go to / or /polls / and then something else to enter our app. So inside our My Site, or inside of our project.urls, we added a polls, which includes the polls app URLs file. So it points us into that file. So inside of our polls, we had to create a URLs file, and this is where we're going to be creating our URLs inside of our polls app. So anytime you go to just polls / we go into look inside of our views, look for any index or any methods within there with the name index. So we go over to views, index, and we execute that index method. And in here, we're returning an HTTP response. It says, hello, Mike Platoon. All right. And then inside of our models, we literally just created some more models for question and choices. So a choice belongs to a question. A question can have many choices. All right. So once we created our models, we're just going to be working with our SQLite database. We're not going to actually be working with a Postgres database for right now. You can add a Postgres database if you want, but just for this, all intents and purposes, we're going to keep it with our SQLite database. What questions do you have about that process? All right. So once I created my models, now I actually need to make a migration script to execute to actually put them in our database. So Python manage.py, make migrations. When I click that, it says migrations for polls, at polls, create an initial.py file in our migrations directory inside of our polls app. What do I have to do after I make a migration script?
Migrate?
Yep. So I can do Python manage.py, migrate. And I can migrate just the polls app models. So if I do Python manage.py, migrate polls, it'll look inside the polls app, run this migration, and it'll just create a single model create the two models, question and choice. But if I wanted to migrate all the models associated with this Django project and the application, I can just do Python manage.py, migrate, and it's going to create all the tables for this entire project. That includes all of the apps that are already included in Django. So if I run Python manage.py, migrate, it runs all these migrations scripts that are already built in. So notice how it says like content types. We have a content types app. We have admin initial. So that's associated with the admin app. We have the auth, which is there's a bunch of them with that. And that's associated with the auth app. And at the very bottom, we have our polls app, which is associated with our polls app that we just did. All right, so if I clear that, I'm going to pip install Django extensions, because I want to go create some dummy data. And now I actually need to add Django extensions to my settings.py file, because that in itself is its own app, Django extensions. I'm going to add a little comma there as well for if we ever want to add new apps in the future. So I can do Python manage.py shell _plus see if this works. Okay. So I can now create some dummy data for our application. So I can do that question dot objects dot all just to make sure. So I don't have anything. So obviously there's no questions in there yet. So I can actually create a new question by, well, first I have to import from Django.utils import time zone. So I can actually create a publish date like that. Now I can do question equals, I'm creating a new question object. Question, I want the question to be, what's your favorite color? And then the time zone, or like the pub date, underscore date equals time zone dot now. If I click that, what happened? So question got an unexpected keyword argument question. Oh, so it's not question over here. It looks like it's question text. Underscore text. All right, now if I do question, I get that question object. Initially doesn't have an ID of none, or it has an ID of none because I haven't actually saved it to my database, so I can save that. Now I can do question. Now I get an object with an ID of 1. If I can do question underscore text, I get what's your favorite color. If I want question dot pub date, I get the published date in this weird format. What questions do you have about creating a new question?
So, why did you, I guess I'm not following why that all happened in the command line instead of up in your model there.
What do you mean not up in the model?
So why isn't there a line that says question 1 equals what's your favorite color?
Question 1 equals what's your favorite color?
Up in your models.py.
In here?
Yeah.
Why isn't there?
Like, is that what you just did? That's how you create questions for a poll?
Yes.
On your website?
Yes.
Okay.
I think he's asking why isn't the seed data in the code?
In here?
Or just, yeah, I guess.
So why don't I do like the question equals like create a new dot, like create something in here, like question.
Yeah, something like that, where then you can just list all the questions you want, and you don't have to do that stuff that you just did.
Because I would still have to do all this manually stuff, but I just have to put it up here. And you want to keep things separate, so you don't want to actually do queries and do creating new data within your models at all. You want to do that outside of your application.
Okay.
So like the models is literally just stores the database schema of what your database should look like.
Okay.
And I could have easily like gone into here. Well, I guess I couldn't. If I had a Postgres database, I'd be able to come into here and like create posts and comments or questions and choices manually through this GUI, but I just did it from the command line.
Got it.
Cool. So notice how when I do like question, if I print the question dot objects, or I'll say like objects dot, or not question, or yeah, question dot objects dot first to grab that first question. It's got this question object. That doesn't look like, I don't know what that, like, I don't know what data is associated with it. That's not very pretty. Does anybody remember a method that we can use to like pretty up or pretty anytime you print an object out to the screen?
The dunder, str, I think.
Was it Geo?
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So in my class, if I do want to pretty something up, I do just remember dunder.string. Again, this is just object-oriented programming that we're doing. I can pass in self and then just return an f string called like ID equals self.id and question text is self.question text. And again, I can also do that down here. With choice, but instead of question ID, we can do like question or choice text. Choice text equals choice text. So now if I quit that and open up another shell plus and do question dot objects dot first, now it's kind of printed kind of nice. I know what ID it is and I know what question it is. All right, so I created a question. Now let's actually create some choices for that question. So I'm just gonna do question dot, or I'm gonna create a variable called question and do question dot objects dot first to grab that first object. So if I do question, I get that first object. If I do question dot choices, so if I do question dot choices through this, I can hopefully grab all the choices to that. So right now it's an empty, so there's no choices associated with this question. But I can actually create some choices. I do choices.create, and let's do choice text equals red, and then votes equals initially 0. So there's one. I'm going to create another one, a broad green. So I created a green and now blue. So I created 3 choices for that. Now if I do questions.choices.all, I get 3 choices. So it says ID choice text red, ID choice 2 of choice text green, and red or in blue.
And Tom, if you do all this and you show it to your manager and they said, "Oh no, we wanted green, blue, and yellow,"
So
is it an easy way to change that?
Yeah, so green, blue, and yellow. So here we want to change red. So if I do choices.all, grab the first index, so that's red. If I do choice text, just to make sure it's red, I can do choice text equals, was it yellow?
Yep.
All right, so I change that to yellow. And now so it's still red. So I can do dot save. Wait, let's see if that worked. How is that? So choice dot yellow. So what I can do is literally just go into choice dot objects dot get, where ID equals 1. So I got the red dot choice text equals yellow. I don't know if I can do that. So
when we were doing one of the exercises for the swimming the swimming world records, there was a list of acceptable strokes that they could do.
Yep.
And that was just written up in your not in the command line. And I wonder, like, could you do something similar here where it's like, these are the options?
Yeah, you could, but you'd have to create a validator for that.
Okay.
Yep.
So there's no easy way to change it once or if you misspelled something.
So yeah, hold on. There is a way. Let's try this again. So if I do choice, oh crap, what did I just do? Choice. So if I do choice dot objects dot get, I'll just do first one. So it's red. And I want to change that. So if I do choice equals choice dot objects dot first. Oh, what's going on? Objects. And I choice dot choice text. I just want to see what that is. It's red. If I want to change that to yellow, and then do choice dot save. And now if I do grab that first object, see now it's yellow.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. Cool. So I've got 3 choices. So if I do choice dot choice dot objects dot first, I'm grabbing the yellow object. Now if I do choice dot question, I get the question by going from choice to question through that that field.
What does the save method do?
It literally just saves it to the database again. So create will create an object and automatically save it. Save, if I create an object just within the shell, but not saving it to the database, I'll actually need to actually call .save to it to actually save that object to the database.
So the object will exist in Python, but it won't exist in the database set, and that's how it inserts it in there.
Correct.
There's also something in the Django docs about just using update, and if you use update, then you don't have to save.
Yeah, so there's multiple methods. There's update, there's save, there's create. But yeah. All right, so I've got these dunder string methods, the kind of pretty, the outputs of my objects. All right. So now let's add some more views. So when I go to polls, I get hello Mike Platoon right now. It's let's go to run server. So if I get hello Mike Platoon, but maybe I want to go to polls.1 to view the question of something. So I can make these routes, these URLs, a little dynamic. So inside my URLs pattern, I'm going to create some more URL patterns. So once I go to polls, and I want this polls/1, polls/2, I want to list each individual question when I visit that specific poll ID. So I can do int : question ID. So this is dynamic. This will be the actual question ID of whatever question I want to list from the database. And instead of views.index, I want to view the detail of that specific of that question. So I'm throwing an error, polls.views has no attribute detail. So I created a URL with a detail view method, which doesn't exist. So I can do def detail, pass in a request, and I need to pass in a question ID because this is being extrapolated from the URL. And now I can say return HTTP response, and then F string, you're looking at question, question ID. So now everything's working. Now if I go to here, it says you're looking at question 1. If I go to polls.2, you're looking at question 2. Polls.3, you're looking at question 3. Polls. 7 million, blah, blah, blah. You're looking at question 7, 8, blah, 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 blah. What questions do you have about the detail view and going to URLs, polls / a question ID that takes in an integer as an ID, which this question ID is passed into the detail view method as an argument right here, and it returns this HTTP response, and it passes that question ID into the HTTP response and prints that out to the screen. Let's create a couple more.
That doesn't have to be called detail, right? It can be called anything.
Yep, it can be called anything. So I'm creating another one. When I go to question ID / results, I want to view the results of that question. And over here, if I go to the question ID / vote, I want to vote on that question. So if I create a couple more methods or view methods, so I've got results that also passes in a question ID, and I vote on that question ID. It says, if I go to the results, it says you're looking at the results for the question ID, and for the vote, it says you're voting on question ID. So if I come over here, polls, still working. And if I go to polls / vote, it says you're voting on that question. If I do, results, I'm viewing the results of that question. What questions do you have about the additional views and the URLs?
So I remember in the, I think it was the SQL workshop, they were talking about not using like IDs in your URLs because it gives away how your database is organized. How would you avoid that when you're doing URL patterns like this?
We'll get into more, you'll get into that once we get into React to be able to hide, explicitly hide your database IDs. But yeah, but going forward until we get into React, we'll be using our IDs to look at as our database IDs in our URLs. But yeah, so that won't come until React. But right now it's fine. And over here, you can kind of see in our terminal what route we're looking at. So we're doing get request at polls / vote and polls / result. Does anybody have any questions so far?
I have another one, Tom.
Yep.
So here right now, you're passing one argument, integer question ID, and under views.py, that's the question ID we're passing in. Can we like, it doesn't necessarily have to limit it to one argument passing, right?
Correct. You can pass in more if needed.
Okay. That's what.
Yeah. All right. What else? All right. So,
Sorry, what would happen
Oh,
if
yep.
you put in something that wasn't an ID?
an ID, you can pass in something like a string, I think it's something like that, and it could be a string argument. So if I actually passed in something that wasn't an ID,
Yeah, would it give you an error because it doesn't match the?
yeah.
Okay.
So it says using the URL config defined in Django, try these specific patterns: admin, polls, and int ID. It says polls did not match any of these. So
But
it's
as long as it matches the data type, you can put in whatever you want.
yeah.
Is
Right
there?
now.
So what if you? Oh, okay. You're gonna go over how to like make that fail later when there's not an actual ID in the
Yes.
database.
Yep. So right here, we're in the URLs, we're going to the views, and the views are handling all of our business logic right now. We're not actually grabbing anything from the database yet. And also, we don't have any HTML templates. So let's first create some templates, because right now we're literally just passing this HTTP response, and it's literally just passing whatever text we want back to the user. Let's actually create some templates. So to create templates, we need to, inside of our polls app, we need to create another directory called templates. And inside of our templates folder, we're going to create another directory called the name of our app, which is polls. And inside of our polls directory, we want to create a different HTML files associated with these views, these view methods. So inside of our polls, let's create an index.html file. And I'm just going to copy some code. So when I visit this polls /, I actually want it to say, instead of hello, Mike Platoon, you're looking at all the questions. So if I refresh this, this page should list all of the poll questions. And in my index.html, I've got all polls, and I'm able to do inline Python and execute Python within my HTML by looping through a list of questions and creating an ordered list. And for each question in the list, I'm going to create a link to the question ID. And if there aren't any polls or any questions, it's just going to return no polls are available. So in this HTML, it says if the latest question list, so it should, I'm in my views, let's actually split the screen here. In my views, I want to grab all the questions and put them, somehow render this index.html file and insert all the questions into this index.html file. So I'm looking for like a latest question list, and for each question in latest question list, I want to render this list of questions. So instead of using this HTTP response, I want to use a render. So I need to, well, before I do that, inside my method, I need to look for, so if I look at here inside my view, I need to grab all the questions from my models or from my database. So up here, I need to from.models import the question model. And inside of here, I can say, hey, latest question, I'll just say like question list equals what's the Python query to grab all the questions. Jarrett Hosey. If I wanted to grab all the questions from the database, what's the query to do that?
Is it just .all?
So question.objects.all. Is that what it is? Yep. Okay. So let's actually just print the question list. So if I come over here and just refresh this, everything is working. But if I look down here inside the terminal, I get a question list. I'm printing the actual question list. And when we were working with Psycob G2, when were we doing that? I keep forgetting the question, or with the challenge that we were having to pass data in our HTML as an object. I forgot what question that was, or what challenge that was. So now I've got my list of questions, which is right here. Right now there's only one. I can create more later. And instead of returning this HTTP response, I actually want to render the request, which takes in 3 arguments: the request, the actual HTML template, polls/index.html, and also any data I want to pass in to this index.html. So right now, some data, and with Psycob G2 or using this, passing in data to my HTML template, I need to pass it in as an object. So I can pass in question list equals question list. And now I can pass that into here. And instead of question list, I'm going to say question list. So if I refresh this, I get all polls. So what's happening is when I come to polls / goes to the URLs, comes into this URL patterns, looks into views, finds an index method, comes into views, finds the index method, takes in the request, comes into here, searches through all the database, or searches through the database through this database query, question.objects.all, returns a query set, assigns it to this variable called question list. I'm creating a data object that has a key of question list. This can be called anything I want. And I'm just assigning that value to an array of questions. And then I'm returning this render that initially passes in a request, and then it passes in the HTML template that I want to render, and then I'm passing in this data object into that index.html template. So it comes over here to rendering all polls, and it says, hey, if there's a question list on like object or key in this object, then loop through that question list right here for question in question list, and render a list tag and also a link tag that links to this polls.question ID, and it prints off or also shows the question text. And then we have this little N4. And if there aren't any polls, else we have no polls are available. So I'm going to come in here. I get this. And if I click on this href, it's going to go to the polls dot whatever question ID that is. So if I click on this, it goes to polls-1. And it says, hey, this isn't a valid URL for some reason. So if I go to URLs, if I do question, so like that. Oh, there we go. It says now you're looking at question 1. What questions do you have about that process? So again, I created a templates folder, created the polls directory inside the templates folder, and inside the polls directory, I created the index HTML template.
What did you just do when it wasn't working and you got it to say you're on question 1 now?
So inside this href, it goes to polls / or backslash question ID /. And in my URLs, I didn't have an initial backslash there. So I needed to explicitly add that backslash because in my index, it was looking for that backslash.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep. What other questions?
Can you go back to the views.py for a second?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So now when I visit the question 1, the individual question, so I'm on here, it's passing in that question ID, and it says you're looking at question ID here. So now let's just keep on building. Let's create a detail page. So I can say like question equals question dot objects dot get, and I want to get the individual question. I can say ID equals question ID. I can do print that question in the terminal. So if I come up here and if I refresh that, nothing changed yet. But if I look down here in the terminal, it says ID question, what's your favorite color? So now I can also assign an object to this because I need to pass in an object to my HTML template. I can say question is equal to that question object, which is right here. And instead of this returning this HTTP response, I want to return render the request and then the polls / detail.html page. I want to also pass in that data object into the details.html page, which I have yet to create. So if I create this details page, detail.html, cool. And now in the here, I can say like h1 details about question. And then if I want to grab the question idea, I can do question.id. And then I can do also grab the question text. And then I can grab, hey, for the choice in the question.choices.all. So I'm literally kind of running a Django query here. I can grab or display the choice.text. So if I'm running Python, I only need one opening bracket and closing bracket followed by this %sign. So for choices in question.choices.all. And if I want to display specific elements inline or inside the HTML, I use the double bracket by doing choice.choicetext. And I always need an N for loop or an end if it's an if statement at the end of the for loops. So if I come back here and I refresh it, it says, what's your favorite color? Comes in here, details about the question ID. I'm displaying the question text. I'm looping through all the choices associated with that question, and I'm printing off, I'm displaying the choice text. All right.
So where does back end stop and front end begin in this process? Or is this all back end?
So this is technically, so the back end essentially stops when I'm passing data to my HTML template. And then the front end is here. So in here, it's passing all the data to my templates. And then this is what I'm seeing on the screen is all this template stuff.
Hey, Tom, when in the views file, that render method, is it always just looking for just a single dictionary being passed in at the end, like where you have data? So anything that you want to pass in, you have to like make it into a dictionary. So if I had like more than just question list, I had like a bunch of other stuff. I have to make sure it's all inside a dictionary and just pass that straight dictionary in.
Yep. So I can do,
And
say,
that's
like,
essentially just passing the variables. You're like putting your variables in there, and that's how you transfer your variables over.
yep. So for example, for a question, I can say like some or more data, and say like whatever. And then in my detail, I can literally print like more data. Let's say more data. Oh, so right here it says more data. So I'm just passing that as an object. So if you want to pass more, you can have as much as you want on there. All right, let's keep going. So in here, let's talk about, yeah, let's just keep going. So we got results. Let's talk about these right here, this right here. So we're hard coding the actual poll/question ID. We don't necessarily want to, anytime we're hard coding things, we're making things a little fragile and not as scalable. Because what if we just decide to change a link somewhere, decide to change some information about this stuff, about like either change a view or change what happens when I go to this specific route. So instead of pointing this to the specific question ID, or when I click this, instead of it going to directly to this the specific route, like poll/question ID, I want to use what view I actually want to use and what data I want to pass into that view. So for index, I want to use what is called a named route. So I'm just going to copy that here. So instead of poll/question ID, I'm going to say, hey, inside the URLs, or go to the URL that uses the polls/detail view and pass in the question ID associated with this question. So if I go into views, or I'm sorry, go into the URLs, that's what this name is for. This is for a named route. So I'm going to say app_name, just in case I have more apps. I'm going to go to the polls app and look for the detail view. So I'm going into the polls app, look at the detail view, and passing in that question ID into that URL right here. And it's going to execute that. So if I come over, back over here, what's your favorite color? It still works. Where's that in more data? I get rid of that. All right. What questions do you have so far? You want to take another 5-minute break?
How much more is there after a 5-minute break?
We have to create a form and we have to do the results. So it's kind of a lot. It's a lot of code, but it shouldn't take that long. Or it's a lot of, yeah, let's just take a 5-minute break.